A remote path is only as strong as its narrowest, best defended choke point, which is why hardened gateways are non-negotiable. All vendor connections should traverse a single entry service that enforces multi-factor authentication, MFA, verifies device posture where feasible, and tunnels traffic through encrypted management channels whose cipher suites and certificates you control. Hardened means configuration baselines, timely patching, restricted administrative interfaces, and logging that cannot be altered by the people who pass through the door. Device checks can be as simple as certificate-based trust for managed vendor laptops or a virtual desktop that denies copy, paste, and local mapping. An assessor expects artifacts, gateway configuration exports, MFA enrollment records, certificate inventories with expirations, and change logs that show who altered policies and when. The correct exam instinct is to prefer access that converges on one hardened gateway with mandatory controls over access that disperses across ad hoc tunnels. The cardholder data environment, CDE, must never be a place for direct vendor landings. Safe designs route all administration through bastions and recorded jump hosts, using segmented networks and proxy controls that make lateral movement visible and hard. A bastion centralizes the choke point, enforces policy, scrubs client tools, and records full session telemetry, while the jump host confines what can be reached on the far side. In mature environments, the bastion presents standard tools and denies uploads of arbitrary binaries. Clipboard and file transfer are blocked by default and granted only for specific tickets that justify them. Assessors look for topology diagrams that show the one-way path into the CDE, access control lists that match those diagrams, and recordings that map exactly to the hops permitted. The key exam habit is to refuse designs that let vendors terminate directly on CDE targets. Even if controls are promised, verification collapses when there is no fixed place to observe. Least privilege is more than a slogan when it removes dangerous capabilities by default. Roles should grant only the minimal commands and objects required for the job, with elevation granted per task and revoked on completion. Clipboard access, file transfer, port forwarding, and agent installation are the first features attackers abuse and are therefore the first features to deny. When a vendor must import a patch or export a log bundle, the policy can allow a single transfer tied to a ticket and a checksum, and the recording should show the event. Artifacts that prove least privilege include role definitions, entitlements linked to identities, exception approvals with expirations, and denial logs that show the system refused out-of-policy attempts. On the exam, choose answers that make risky operations exceptional and provable rather than ambient and invisible. Least privilege works when it is expressed as rules the gateway enforces and as records the assessor can read. Identity must be personal to be accountable. Vendor access should bind to named individuals, not to shared accounts, distribution credentials, or unverifiable contractor subusers. Identity proofing at onboarding, unique credentials, isolated second factors, and immediate deprovisioning on personnel change are the practices that prevent ghost access long after a contract ends. Where a vendor demands a shared tool account, route use through a gateway that converts the shared secret into personal accountability with check-in and check-out and session watermarking. Evidence includes identity-proofing artifacts, access requests with manager attestations, mapping tables that link external identities to internal accounts, and deprovisioning tickets with timestamps aligned to HR offboarding notices. For the exam, if an option tolerates shared accounts because the vendor requires it, it is almost certainly the wrong answer, unless wrapped in controls that restore person-level traceability. If it is not recorded, it did not happen, at least not in a way that survives audit. Comprehensive session recording should capture keystrokes, screen output, command transcripts, file transfer metadata, and session environment details like source IP, geolocation, and client fingerprint. Retention must be tamper-evident, with access controls that separate viewers from editors and logs that note every playback. Indexing recordings to tickets and change requests turns a library of video into a navigable evidence set. A reviewer can start with a change and jump to the exact session that implemented it. The artifacts to expect are storage integrity proofs, retention policies with legal sign-off, and periodic sampling reports that confirm recordings are present and readable. On the exam, prefer controls that make recordings central to the governance system rather than optional extra logging. Detection turns from reactive to proactive when patterns are modeled. Alerting on odd hours, geography changes, privilege spikes, or unusual command sequences makes abuse visible before damage spreads. A vendor who always works from one country within a predictable time band on a stable set of systems should trigger immediate review when a session appears at 3 in the morning from a new location with rapid privilege elevation. Good programs correlate gateway data with endpoint logs and ticketing systems so anomalies include context about change windows and maintenance events. Evidence appears as alert definitions, tuning notes, suppression rules with expirations, and a queue of investigated alerts with outcomes. In exam scenarios, the credible answer emphasizes both detection logic and the artifacts that show those detections led to human decisions, not silent dashboards. Credentials and certificates age, and stale trust is a quiet failure mode. Rotate passwords, keys, and certificates on a defined cadence, and rotate immediately after personnel changes, scope adjustments, or incident suspicions. Certificate management should track issuers, subjects, expirations, and revocation status. Secrets management should track where credentials are injected, for which roles, and under what conditions. Rotation must be tested so that access breaks cleanly when something is retired, and logs should tie each rotation to a ticket and an approver. Assessors will ask to see the timeline when a contractor left and the evidence that their access closed in minutes, not weeks. The exam favors answers that pair rotation policy with proof of execution because only execution reduces risk. Emergencies still need rails. Define a break glass path that is rare, approved, short, and automatically reviewed afterward. Break glass identities should be distinct, heavily monitored, and unavailable without two approvals that are not both from the vendor. Sessions must be recorded like any other, and elevation should end on a timer that cannot be extended without a fresh approval. After use, a post-incident review checks that the emergency was real, that actions match the stated need, and that any configuration drift was documented and reversed if appropriate. Evidence includes the emergency access policy, the approval and expiry logs for each event, and the review notes tied to remediation tickets. On the exam, resist permanent emergency options. The correct posture treats emergencies as design cases with structure, not loopholes. Vendor incidents are not theoretical when remote access exists, so rehearse the parts that must work under stress. A solid procedure isolates a vendor's accounts at the gateway within minutes, revokes tokens and certificates, disables pending approvals, and flags sessions for immediate termination. Notifications go to the vendor's security contact and to internal stakeholders named in the inventory entry. Evidence capture preserves recordings, gateway logs, and endpoint traces, and a revocation checklist confirms that residual paths, API keys, service accounts, unattended jobs are closed. Replacement access, if needed for continued operations, follows the same approvals as any other grant, not a shortcut. Assessors will expect a drill record with times, owners, and findings, and the exam expects you to choose answers that keep evidence and speed intact at the same time. Proving effectiveness is simpler when every element is linked to the change system. A reviewer should be able to pick any recent infrastructure or application change and trace it to the ticket, the approval that granted just-in-time access, the Bastion session recording, the commands or steps executed, and the post-change validation. Sampling becomes fast when naming is consistent and when the gateway enforces ticket numbers on session start. Artifacts include cross-references embedded in logs, dashboards that show changes with recordings, and periodic internal audits that publish sample results with pass and fail reasons. The right exam instinct is to elevate traceability over promises. The design that lets you prove a story is always stronger than the design that asks you to believe one. Even with pristine guardrails, drift will try to creep in, which is why periodic reviews tighten the posture. Quarterly, confirm that each vendor's purpose remains valid, that systems in scope match reality, that session windows reflect actual maintenance patterns, and that least privilege roles have not accreted permissions. Remove dormant vendors, shrink overly generous time bands, and delete exception rules that outlived their project. Publish a short review note per vendor with owner sign-off and the list of adjustments made. Assessors read these notes as living governance, and the exam favors choices that show remote access is actively curated rather than passively allowed. The last steps turn principle into a concrete upgrade you can carry forward. Choose one high-risk vendor, the one who reaches production systems, touches payment flows, or has the widest footprint, and tighten 3 elements immediately. Shorten session windows to the minimum that still lets maintenance succeed. Raise logging from transcripts to full screen plus keystroke capture if feasible. And refactor roles so they start at the least privilege that enables their common tasks. Close the loop with a short memo to stakeholders describing the change and pointing to the updated inventory record, the gateway policy diff, and the sampling plan that will verify the effect next month. This small sequence models the behavior the PCI exam rewards. Make risk visible, change a control, attach evidence, and plan the check that proves the change worked. Stepping back, a defensible vendor access program has a rhythm the assessor can follow without special tools. The inventory says who and why. The gateway proves how and where. Just-in-time approvals shape when. Bastions and jump hosts enforce where and what. Least privilege roles define what exactly. Personal identities decide who, not which company. Recordings preserve how. Analytics decide whether behavior is normal. Rotations keep trust fresh. Break glass keeps urgency on rails. Rehearsals show the bad day is survivable. And sampling ties all of it to real change. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, expects control and proof. Vendor remote access is where both are tested in the open. Build the habit of reading every design as an evidence chain, and you will select the answers the exam considers correct because you are selecting the habits that keep real systems safe. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.